Met some unbelievable, wonderful people, some great former ball players. I've had my collection at the Bob Bullock Museum in Austin, at the Corpus Christi Museum, Fielder Museum in Arlington, the Texas Rangers Museum before they shut that down. We've done a PBS series called Through a Cat's Eyes that some of y'all might have seen, hopefully. Wrote 3 books. I get calls from, it's amazing, I get calls from people in New York because the Cats for a while were a Dodgers farm team. So it's been an unbelievable experience for me, and hopefully I can share a little bit of it with you tonight. But first I got to tell you that the Cats are playing right now at LaGray Field, and I'll tell you that in a minute. But if we wanted to go to the game when the Cats started in 1888, we'd have had left about 6 hours ago. And if you thought about it, when we got there, we couldn't park. We'd have to give our horse and buggy to a parking attendant that would have to put up with horses and buggies and water the horses. I mean, it was a little different time back then. Most of the travel was by train, but baseball started in earnest professionally here in Texas with the 1888 Texas League. All the big cities had the teams: Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, Wichita Falls was considered a very big city at the time, and they had ball. And of course, we had the Fort Worth Panthers. They were the Panthers for the first 25, 30 years of their existence. And does anybody know why they chose the nickname Panthers?
Was it because there were wild panthers that used to roam the area?
Very, very close. Just like the baseball teams, Fort Worth and Dallas hated each other. And Dallas and Fort Worth were vying for business in the late 1870s. And so the Dallas newspaper wrote an article that said, "You don't want to go to Fort Worth, it's so sleepy." A panther was seen laying in the town square. So the Fort Worth Mercantile Association, which is now the Chamber of Commerce, took an ad out in the next week's paper and said, "Come to Panther City where the partying really starts." And so from that on, they became Panther City. And they carried that nickname, and if you go back and think about it, there used to be a time from, the 1900s all through to probably 1980 where there were 60,000 businesses called Panther City something. Panther City Oil, Panther City Grease, Panther City Hall, where some of our country western fans got their start. So that's how the nickname Panther started. Well, with any startup in the Texas League, just like any startup business, it wasn't a smooth start. The Texas League had spurts and starts all through the 1888, 90, 91, 92. They played up through, they did not play in 93, I believe, but they played 94, 95, and the Cats actually won their first championship in 1895. And that team is the team up there on the top right. That was the Cats' first professional championship. The baseball started in that 96, but the season didn't complete because the teams couldn't field teams. People had to go to work. The Spanish-American War took a lot of players. And so they ceased to exist for a couple of years. And then from 1900 to about 1907, the leagues were split. Travel costs were very expensive, and so they had kind of a North Texas League and a South Texas League. And the North Texas League had Fort Worth and Dallas. Paris had a team. Corsicana had a team. In the South Texas League, it was Houston, Galveston, which was big in the Texas League early in the process, San Antonio, and what else? Beaumont. So those were the teams in the South. In 1907, though, the league fathers got together and said, okay, we can make this work. Travel got better. Train travel got more accessible to everybody, and so they started the full Texas League. And the Texas League, as we know today, basically kind of grew out of that. Even though it shows its roots in 1888, it really got kicked off and running in 1907. Cats won a championship again in 1905 in the North Texas League. And they had some very unique individuals. That 1895 team featured a third baseman who actually became a great trivia question because he went on to play for the Chicago Cubs. And if any of y'all remember the famous, well, y'all won't remember, hopefully not anyway, But y'all have heard of the famous poem, Tinkers to Evers to Chance, which is a double play from shortstop to second to first. And everybody asked the trivia question, who was the third baseman on that Cubs team? And his name was Harry Steinfeld. And he actually grew up in Fort Worth and played on this 1895 Fort Worth Cats team. They started playing in that era in South Fort Worth. Y'all know where the TNP station is, the big one downtown? That used to be called the TNP Rail Yard. And they had the whole area down there. Sometimes they'd call it the reservation, the TNP reservation. And so during those early years, they would play somewhere on that reservation. I actually found an 1888 Sanborn map. Y'all know what a Sanborn map is? And for those that ever do research, Sanborn maps are great. But I found a Sanborn map that actually showed the field in South Fort Worth, and my mind just went blank on the crossroad. Vickery and, anyway, I'll think of it in a second. It's in the book. But that was their first park. And then in 1903, a gentleman who ran the North Texas Traction Company built a park or donated the land for a park just to a little farther east to where, you know where the bus station is, the T station where they store all the buses at night? That field or that area was Haynes Park. Some people used to think it was named after A.S. Hayne, who was the only casualty from the Spring Palace fire, but actually it was because the North Texas Traction owner donated that land, and that's what became Haynes Park. In 1909, though, a gentleman who will become synonymous with Fort Worth and the Texas League, J. Walter Morris, actually bought the Cats. And in 1903, something else had happened in Fort Worth. Anybody want to tell me what happened at that time? Anybody historian knows? Swift Armor decided to come to Fort Worth and open a meat packing plant. So just kind of tell you how businesses and mercantile and marketing makes a big difference in lives. They built the plant on the north side of Fort Worth in an area that was unincorporated, they incorporated, called Niles City, which is the stockyards today. And so everybody within 300 miles came to Fort Worth to work in the meatpacking plants. And in fact, one of the famous Cats that we'll reference here in a second actually grew up in Fort Worth, and he was the greatest right-handed hitter in the history of baseball. Anybody know his name? Y'all gonna have to brush up on your baseball history. Rogers Hornsby. Rogers Hornsby, considered the greatest right-handed, hit 400 3 times in his career. He actually was born in Winter, Texas, out west, but his mom needed a job, and so when they opened the meatpacking plants, they moved to Fort Worth, and he actually grew up a Northsider. He actually came back to manage the Cats in 1942, and that's a picture of him where it says War Relief. He'll be the manager on the left side up front by the window. So with that movement of all the people to the north side, J. Walter Morris, who owned the park on the south side, said, well, all the people are going north. I need to get over there. So he went and bought 5 acres on North Main, but on the west side of Main Street, and built the first Morris Park, which eventually became Panther Park when he sold and moved on. And that park is that one up there in the upper left-hand corner by the stadium. And so they played there through their heydays. So that was kind of the early starts, and up through the 1920s, or up to 1920. When they moved into this park, it became the first really great era in definitely Fort Worth Cats baseball, but also Texas League baseball. There are 2 minor league teams that actually have a featured wall in Cooperstown, which is mainly for the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, right? Those are the Baltimore Orioles of the era from 1919 to 1926, and the Fort Worth Panthers from 1920 to 1925. And the reason is both of those teams won their respective league championships 6 and 7 straight years, and then in the case of the Fort Worth Cats, they also won the Dixie Series 5 of those 6 years. And it started with the 1920 club, the club was so good that they, being the management, decided that they needed to have a bigger series. The World Series was growing, getting big, and so they challenged the Southern Association, which were the teams of Nashville and Mobile and Little Rock and that group, to a Dixie World Series championship. Champions of the Southern League, champions of the Texas League. And that Dixie Series got to be so big that fans were pounding into Birmingham, Nashville, Fort Worth for 6 straight years. I think all the rest of the Texas League got a little jealous. I mean, to the tune of 12 to 14,000 fans a game. I mean, that was huge in 1920. It was so big that Amon Carter, who said that if he ever went to Dallas, he would take a sack lunch and a dime so he wouldn't have to spend the dime. He didn't like Dallas. He gave him, or he would rent a special train to take patrons to the games, Birmingham, Nashville, whatever. And he called the Dixie Series Special. And I actually have, it's in the book, and I have an actual old ticket from that. And the ticket shows the Dixie Series Special in the front, and then you open it up, it has the menu on your trip out to the park, to Nashville, I think that one was. So it was a big deal. Now you got to remember, and I got to set this picture because it'll help to kind of tie in some of the different eras, but this was truly independent baseball. Major league salaries weren't what they were today. And a lot of times these ball players could make as much money playing baseball and then working a second job than they could making full-time wages at the major league level, or even that plus another job. The Fort Worth Fire Department was really big on hiring Fort Worth cats. In fact, 2 of the players, Smokey Thompson and Red Jarvis, went on to become fire captains later on in their careers. And so these cats, and we're talking about guys like Paul Wattell, Joe Pate, Clarence Kraft, who went on to become a county judge in Fort Worth, Tarrant County, and had a big Ford dealership downtown. Jacinto Calvo, who was a Cuban and very unusual for this part of the country at that time. Possum Moore, I'm trying to think of it. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of them. That 1923 team will depict many of those players, but they probably had major league quality, but they can make more money playing for the Fort Worth Cats and then working the jobs on the side, so they just decided to stay in Fort Worth. Just a little different era than it is now. So we have this great team. Everything's going great. This stadium's a wooden structure, didn't quite measure up. So the business manager at the time, named Paul LaGrave, and the owner, who was a guy named W.K. Stripling, Stripling Cox Stores, decided to get together and build a new ballpark. So they took the same block, but they went on the east side of Main Street and built, in 1926, built Panther Park. And Panther Park was the first concrete and steel structure in the South outside of Major League Baseball, and it was also the first to feature a radio booth. The first radio broadcast in the South occurred in that park in 1922. August 30th of 1922, Amon Carter had started with WBAP radio, and they actually did a broadcast where they would teletype the game to the studio, and he would broadcast it live over the radio. Well, the response was so great that the next day, a guy named Harold Huff, who was the announcer, actually they ran a cord 1.5 miles down the viaduct to the ballpark, and he sat on a crate and broadcast live from the stadium on September 1st. First live broadcast of a baseball game in throughout the Southwest. So there's a lot of neat history through that period of time. Of course, Dallas won their next championship in 1926, so they broke the string. And then there was some fits and starts with the Cats. Cats kind of broke up. Paul LaGrave became ill. Jake Atz, who had managed the club through all this period, was let go, went on to New Orleans. And so the Cats kind of simmered out a little bit. But they came back in 1930 and won their next championship. So 6, and then came that. And then all of a sudden, we all know what happened in 1930, right? And so you would think, though, the Depression era would really put a damper on things, but baseball was strong. Baseball continued throughout the Depression era. The Cats won championships again in 1937 and in 1939. They also had some very colorful characters. They had two guys that had, one after their playing days went to the East Coast and was got in trouble in a big scam, kind of like a Ponzi scheme, and got thrown in jail. And then Lefty Grissom went out to the West Coast, got in a big fight, and was on charges of manslaughter, even though he got let go. But they were also during that time period. This is that time period where we went from truly independent ball to the first level of affiliation. How many of y'all are really true baseball fans that really understand the difference? Okay, well, I guess let me explain it real quick. Affiliated ball means that all the players are owned, literally, by the major league club. And they basically parcel them out to their different minor league teams and say, okay, you're a AA level player, you play at the AA, but they're all owned and their salaries are all paid by the major league level. Independent clubs and independent baseball, that owner of that team, meaning the Fort Worth Cats owner, he had to pay all the salaries. He was responsible for all recruiting. He had to go find the players to play. And so Branch Rickey, who had been befriended Rogers Hornsby and had an affiliation of Fort Worth, actually started the farm system. He did so with the St. Louis Cardinals organization. And that's why the Houston Buffaloes, which was actually his first purchase, the Cardinals purchased the Houston Buffaloes, and they became the first affiliated baseball team in all of that era. And they were all Cardinals. So Dizzy Dean played for the Houston Buffaloes. All the Cardinals that you see later played that. Well, our affiliation kind of was loosely tied to the Detroit Tigers for a while, and we had the folks go up there. But then in the 30s, the Cincinnati Reds came to town and became kind of a lot tighter group. Now, they didn't own the players, but there was a working relationship between them. So you'll see, this was the era when they were actually changed their name too. That's when, the title, and Barbara chose the title, From Panthers to Cats. This is about when that happened. Because all through the 20s and all the big heydays, newsprint was expensive, so the papers kept shortening the name to Cats from Panthers, and so they eventually just became known as the Cats. But it was officially in 1934 that they actually started wearing cats on their breast pocket, and they had the Cincinnati C with ATS in it. And so that's how they've continued that name forever. Played all the way up through, up to the war. I told you Rogers Hornsby came back in 1942 and managed the team. Obviously, all the baseball operations stopped except the Major League level, and the International League stopped because of World War II. And so 43, 44, 45, there's no baseball. Well, in 46, 3 years of planning and strategic thought about this, Major League Baseball decided, okay, we're going to reorganize, we're going to do this, and everybody's going to be affiliated ball. The Cats were lucky enough to be chosen by the Brooklyn Dodgers to be one of their affiliated teams. Branch Rickey had moved from the Cardinals to Brooklyn to become their general manager, but he had also fallen in love with Fort Worth because him and Rogers Hornsby were good friends, and they would come down here and do whatever they do when they get crazy. And so Fort Worth was a big part of them. The first major name to come through Fort Worth as part of the Brooklyn Dodgers was our center fielder. Anybody want to take a guess on who that was?
Edwin Snyder.
A guy named Edwin Snyder. Do y'all know, have y'all ever heard the name Edwin Snyder? I said Duke Snyder, you would, right? Yeah. Duke Snyder was the first well, he wasn't the first Hall of Famer, because actually Carl Hubble pitched briefly for the Cats in the 30s, but he was the really first Hall of Famer that spent a lot of time here. And unfortunately, we lost, in fact, we've lost quite a few of the former Cats here recently, and Duke was one of them. But he said that he came to the Cats and he had just got out of the service and he really hadn't gotten in shape from baseball shape, and we know the difference, right? And he was struggling hitting the ball. And the general manager said, look, son, this is AA Texas League. This is really good baseball, and we're going down to Houston, and if you don't pick it up, we're going to have to probably put you down in Mobile, or I can't remember, I think it was Greenville was their lower A group. And he said, Duke said, I went on that train ride, and I said, man, I got to get it. I don't want to go down there. And he got down to Houston. He hit 3 home runs in that first game. And he said the rest of it was just taking off. Those eras of those Cats games were amazing. During the 30s, the other thing that started happening is major league teams that were training in the South were starting to come up through the big cities by train, and they would play exhibition games. So Babe Ruth actually played at LaGrave Field, Lou Gehrig, Tony Lazzeri, and they would do those through these exhibition games. I got to tell a quick story because the Cats had a pitcher in 1925 by the name of Jimmy Walkup. And Jimmy's pitch was a knuckleball, like we've seen Charlie Huff throw here for a while. He struck the Babe out 3 times. So after the game, all the reporters, or Fort Worth reporters, they're all over the Babe's, what happened, Babe? What's going on? What you struck out? He says, I want it to be known right now, I'm in the big leagues and he ain't. And if you go look at the movie about the Babe, they use that quote, and it came from Fort Worth. So back up to the 49 season, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier of baseball in 1947, and that was a big deal. And in 1949, the Brooklyn Dodgers came to town to play the Cats in an exhibition game. 14,400 people showed up, and a third of them were black to watch Jackie Robinson play in that historic game in Fort Worth. The 49 team, the 48 team was one of my favorite because I knew several of those players, Jack Lindsay and Carroll, Behringer, and several of those, and they won the Texas League Championship and they lost the Dixie Series to Birmingham. Bobby Bragan had come to town to take over that team and manage that team. But that was kind of a funny story. Bobby will tell you that he is 100% totally responsible for Roy Campanella being a Hall of Famer. And we said, well, how's that, Bobby? Because I left so he could have my spot on the roster. And he came down to Fort Worth, took over the team, but they had started the season with a manager by the name of Les Burge. And Les Burge was apparently very miserable to play for, and so they let Les go. Well, after they did, and before they brought Bobby down, they brought in an old pitcher by the name of George Dawkins, who pitched for that club as the kind of the interim manager, and he won 9 straight. And so then Bobby shows up, and he's like, going, wait a minute, if I show up and they start losing, they're going to put George back in there. And he won 2 more games before finally losing. But he said that was a tough thing to do, to have your first managing job after the guy you're replacing just won 9 straight games. But of course, Bobby is synonymous with Fort Worth Cats baseball, and he managed up through the 53 season, and then he moved on. But we had quite a few characters through the 50s. The 1955 team featured a couple of special items. One, the first African American to play for Fort Worth played in 55. Anybody want to take a guess who that is? Maury Wills. Maury Wills was the first Cat. He actually came to town with a guy named just escaped, Thomas. Can't remember his first name, but Mr. Thomas didn't last long, so he left baseball altogether, and so Maury decided to stick it out. And I've got the bat is Danny Ozark's bat, and what was a standard during that time is some of the players would stay in the chosen hotel, some would find apartments, but some would stay with families. Well, Danny Ozark was a little bit older, had his own car, and he had to stay with the family over on the east side of Fort Worth. Well, Maury, the only place he could find to stay was in an apartment over the TNP, the actual rail station, not the old one that was on the south, but the one on the side. And Danny would pick him up every day and take him to the ballpark. So they became good friends. The other thing about that 55 team is 5 of the players went on to become major league managers. And I would challenge anybody to find another minor league team that had 5 former major league managers on it. But Norm Sherry, Danny Ozark, a kid named George Anderson, who by the way is nicknamed Sparky, else? Maury, who went and managed Seattle one year. And the fifth one is Dick Williams. And Dick Williams, Danny Ozark, Joe Landrum, they all played several years in Fort Worth, and they also all played for the Brooklyn Dodgers at different times. We also in 1949 had quite a pitcher who became very well known in the 55 World Series. His name was Carl Erskine. And Carl told me a funny story one time sitting around, and he said, you know, Bobby Bragan was one of the slowest players on a baseball field. He said he couldn't run out of his shadow. And he said, we were playing Dallas in the opening series, and I had pitched and won the first game 1-0. So in the second game, I had my jacket on, I was sitting on the dugout steps, and I was, you know, eating peanuts and putting them in my pocket. And ninth inning, it's tied score 1-1, and Bobby walked, and he got to first base, and he looked at the dugout, and he pointed at me and said, come here. I said, you're running for me. And I said, so I'm spitting out peanuts, and I'm throwing my jacket off, I'm trying to get a little bit loose and whatever. And Bobby had taken the place of the first base coach, and Bobby looked at me and he says, now listen, this left-hander's got a really tricky pickoff move. Do not get picked off. First pitch, I get picked off. Bobby didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. So that's how Carl Erskine got introduced to Bobby Bragan. So they go through all the 50s. Two things happened in the 50s, though, that led to the decline of minor league baseball. Can anybody tell me that? One, air conditioning was the second. Air conditioning and television. And so the fan base just went kaput. And so you saw where in 1949 there were 419 minor league teams. By 1956 that was down to 140. I had the privilege of writing an article, and I'm getting outside the Fort Worth Cats boundaries here a little bit, but I had a chance to write an article for the Texas Almanac, not the last edition, but the one before that, and they asked me to write it on minor league baseball in Texas, and I said, well, I'll do so if you'll let me talk about all the other teams in Texas. Everybody talks about San Antonio and Houston and Fort Worth. What they never talk about are the Pampa Oilers, or the Marshall Browns, or the Paris Rockets, or the Seguin Toros, or all the other teams that in Texas had 100 cities that actually had true professional minor league baseball. At the time, the leagues went AA, AAA, A, then they had B, C, and D. And a lot of the other leagues in Texas were C and D leagues. Texas League was a AA league. The big state league, which is Waco, Austin, that group was a B league. But you couldn't imagine the Lubbock Hubbers, the Abilene Eagles. I mean, you can go on and on. And I had a good friend of mine and I, we went on a little East Texas trip a couple years ago, and we found the old ballpark for the Henderson Oilers and the old ballpark for the Jacksonville Jacks, which is now a rodeo arena. So if you're ever out and you're out visiting these kind of sites, take the almanac with you. It'll tell you if you had a minor league team, and go find a stadium because they're a blast to find. Secondary. So we go through that period, get into the 1960. Am I boring y'all yet? You okay? Okay. 1960 rolls around, and there's about 4 big cities that want Major League Baseball, but the Major League Baseball owners would not budge. They didn't want to expand. New York had lost 2 National League teams. The Giants went to San Francisco, the Dodgers went to LA. So they wanted a National League team in New York. Minneapolis wanted a ball team. Houston wanted a ball team. And there was one more, I can never remember this one, but there's another city that wanted Major League Baseball. But no, because remember that's when Milwaukee moved down. No, it was up in the Northeast. The older I get, the less I'm remembering these things. But there was 4 teams that really wanted baseball in their area, and so they wouldn't do it. Well, Branch Rickey, who was still around, decided, okay, if you're not going to open up, we're going to start a 3rd major league. And so he started what they called the Continental Baseball League. One of the areas they looked at was Dallas-Fort Worth. And they said, look, if you're going to have a major league team, y'all can't be Dallas and Fort Worth. You got to be Dallas-Fort Worth. You got to have to come together. Y'all going to have to do this as a whole, and that's the only way to support Major League Baseball. So J.W. Bateson, who was a big contractor here in Dallas, and I can't remember who owned Hanley, the Cubs at the time, owned the Cats group. They got together and they said, okay, we're going to do this effort to put in Major League Baseball. They even had a design, which I have in the book, of a new stadium they were going to build in Arlington, the first domed stadium in Texas. And I have the drawings and design that they had actually conjured up and concepted for that effort. So take that, Astrodome. Buffalo, Houston, New York, it was LA. That was the other city, because LA only had the Dodgers and they wanted an American League team. That was the other city. LA, Minneapolis, and so Major League Baseball finally relented. I mean, after they were signing up these big cities and finally said, hey, this is really going to happen, Major League Baseball said, wait a minute, okay. So they gave Houston the Colt 45s. They moved the Washington Senators to Minneapolis. They gave New York the Mets, and they gave LA the LA Angels. And so that's basically killed the Continental League. So all the cities that got left out, Dallas-Fort Worth, decided, okay, now what do we do? Well, Dallas-Fort Worth decided, let's keep it together and let's do a joint effort. And so they became the Dallas-Fort Worth Rangers. And that was the first Rangers team in this area. And they would play part of their games at LaGray Field and part of their games over Burnett Park on the south side of town. Dallas was 3 times the size of Fort Worth. The fan base was 3 times the size, and so more and more teams, more and more times they were playing in Dallas than they were in Fort Worth. And so that pretty much started the real decline of minor league baseball in the Fort Worth area. Tommy Mercer and Lamar Hunt, who we all know from the Kansas City Chiefs days, bought back into that franchise and decided in 1964 to separate the two. Fort Worth had a team that played by themselves in the 1964 Texas League, and Dallas became the Rangers. And by the way, they also moved up a classification. They played in the Pacific Coast League during that time. And Dallas played as the Dallas Rangers in the Pacific Coast League. The experiment for it didn't work. Burnett Park was falling apart. Cities came together and then became the Dallas-Fort Worth. Very good. Now we're getting to where y'all remember, huh? Became the Dallas-Fort Worth Spurs. Played from 65 to 71, and then the Rangers came to town. The Washington team that actually, this is kind of a funny story, the original Washington Senators that played all through with Walter Johnson and all that, they're actually the ones that are actually in Minneapolis right now as the Minnesota Twins. In 1961, they gave Washington another franchise. That's the franchise that actually came to Texas. And, you know, there was an old story about the old Washington Senators that said they're first in war, first in peace, but last in the American League. And those of us that grew up with the Rangers, that would have held true for them for many, many years. All right, we can't say it anymore. So that basically killed minor league baseball until 2001. So now everything's affiliated ball. Major League Baseball basically controls a 50-mile radius around where they play. And it's now, it used to be 50, now it's 75 miles. So Major League Baseball cities control 75 of what you can do in that with affiliated ball. Doesn't affect independent ball. So Miles Wolff and several others, and Miles had made a good fortune with Baseball America magazine, decided to start the Northern League of Independent Baseball. And it took off like wildfire. Because now all these cities that had been starving for baseball couldn't get any. And in 2001, the Fort Worth Cats came back and were reborn. We played our first year. Carl Bell was the principal owner. Carl's a Dallas site, but led Fort Worth. I was one of the minority owner groups. Pete O'Brien of Rangers fame was part of the minority groups. And we played our first year at Goldstein Field, which is a Fort Worth ISD field. Struggled a little bit because the ISD wouldn't let us sell beer. And you think that's, who cares, but beer is a huge revenue producer for minor league baseball. And so without that revenue, it kind of hurt. So next year, Carl hurried up and built LaGrave Field. And we chose the old original site of the old LaGrave Field site, which was on the west side of Main Street, and that's it right here, in the shadow of downtown Fort Worth. A couple neat little stories. The old dugouts that were there since 1926 were still there. Nothing else much was, but those dugouts were. And I had a map that showed the distance of where the baselines were to those footers of the dugouts. So we went out, you draw your two lines, they're baselines, where they intersect, okay, that's home plate, supposedly, right? But when we went out the 90 feet to first, second, and third, we found the old original base states exactly where they needed to be at second and third base. So we know for a fact that the field today is exactly set up the way it was when Babe Ruth played here and Jackie Robinson played here, and 50 Hall of Famers played in Fort Worth during either Texas League or exhibition games. And we dug out the dugouts. Found about 50 snakes doing it. But all the dugouts got cleaned up, and now today, if you want to take a group of 10 of y'all can actually rent the dugout and go sit at field level right next to the players. The dugouts are really small, the old ones, and so we had to build some bigger dugouts for the current players. And so LaGrave Field is the only ballpark in America with 4 dugouts. When we first did that, we thought there'd be some little bit of trouble with, language from the ball players can get a little colorful sometimes, and we were kind of worried that, who's there. But in the 10 years they've done it, there's one complaint, and it came from the players. Apparently there was a crew next door that just got so drunk and crazy that they were not behaving themselves. We won 3 championships. I didn't bring one, and I usually do, so sorry about that, but I got championship rings for the 05, 6, and 7 years. That was amazing. Had some great players. We currently have 4 major leaguers on major league rosters that have played for the Fort Worth Cats. Anybody want to take any guess on one of them? Okay. Luke Hochaver is a starting pitcher for the Kansas City Royals. Aaron Crow is a reliever for the Kansas City Royals. Max Scherzer is a starting pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. Jermaine Van Buren is in the bullpen for the Washington Nationals. Mason Moon, a catcher, has been up to Seattle twice in Tacoma. So that's 5 major leaguers that have worn the Cats uniform. And in fact, I'll give you another big surprise. The uniform here, it's number 16 jersey, belonged to Luke Hochaver. And that year that he came to play for us, he was the #1 first draft pick of the whole draft. And so when ESPN splashed his photo as being the first draft pick, guess what jersey he was wearing? That one right there. So that's a record that will never be broken. And we were pretty excited about that because we were on ESPN, Cats. Okay, I don't know what else to tell you. That's pretty much all the history of the whole shooting match. So if you want, excuse me?
I'd say that was a pretty good capsule.
It's hard to talk about 110 years in 30 minutes, but hopefully I got most of it through there. There's been some great colorful characters that played for the Cats. A lot of them chose Fort Worth as their home, which is obviously we're blessed. To see this crowd, I'm just excited. Y'all need to go to, have y'all been to a Cats game? Yeah.
Opening day is awesome, by the way.
I have been.
Make opening day game especially.
Yes, ma'am?
I was late getting here. But anyway, my father played for the Fort Worth Cats, Blackie Adams.
Blackie Adams?
And in the 20s, in 1926, and before and a little bit after. And he went to the Boston Red Sox for about that long.
Yeah, a few of those did that. Okay. I don't remember that name, but that doesn't mean, the old steel trap up here.
I knew you were hitting that, so I looked at some of the stuff like that.
Well, you mentioned La Mesa, and by the way, there were La Mesa Lobos and the Ranger Nitros. I am getting, you know, I've lived this Cats thing for 20 years, and like I told y'all when I first started, I've had a blast with it. This has been an amazing, I mean, the Cats, I guess because of their Brooklyn connection, you will not find a more heartfelt baseball fan than a Brooklyn Dodger. I mean, there's still people crying up there when they moved to LA. And because of that connection to Fort Worth, as I said, I get calls from New York newspapers because when Duke Snyder, you know, passed and some of the stories that he told. And they've all been amazing gentlemen. You know, Bobby Bragan, they didn't make him any better. You know, I've learned a lot from Bobby. Bobby grew up in the South, Birmingham, and quite frankly was very prejudiced growing up. And when the Brooklyn Dodgers announced that they were bringing in Jackie Robinson, there were 4 Dodgers that said they wouldn't play. And Bobby was one of them. And Branch Rickey brought Bobby down and said, "Bobby, we're going to miss you." And he says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Jackie Robinson's going to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he's a lot better ball player than you are." And Bobby, you know, he walked out of there thinking, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" And he said that Jackie Robinson did a 180 on him. He said there was never a more professional, nicer, hardworking, good ball player that he'd ever met. And it basically converted him. And so to the point where when Maury, when he came here in '55, Bobby had already moved on, but he moved out to the West Coast. By the way, he went to Hollywood, Bobby Bragan in Hollywood, and became a Hollywood Stars manager. And there's a famous photo in Life magazine of him laying on his back with his legs crossed, doing this to an umpire. And it was a Life magazine article, and that was Bobby. Well, then when he went up to Spokane, Maury joined him. And Maury was he was a $180 hitter. He was a good fielder, faster than greased lightning, but just couldn't hit. And so Maury Wills credits Bobby with turning him on the left side, teaching me how to bunt, teaching me how to basically slap hit, like we call in softball right now, slap hitting. Turned him around to a 300 hitter, taught him how to steal bases, sets records in base stealing, and probably should be in the Hall of Fame. He probably changed base stealing that Lou Brock and Ricky Henderson kind of took over after that fact. And he gives it all to Bobby Bragan taking the time to do that. So a lot of intertwined baseball stories throughout the whole complex. So are there any questions? Yes, sir.
How do the Cats and the other teams affiliated with the Cats League, do you have a draft per se? Do you have open tryouts? How do you acquire your new players that you bring up?
Two primary ways. One is an open tryout, but I will quite frankly tell you the open tryouts, baseball's not very good. I mean, I will tell you, it's very surprising the level of ball these kids are playing. It really is. And we've had probably in the 10 years, we have typically 280 to 300 kids a year that try out, and we typically take 1, maybe 2. And these are college baseball players. I mean, they're no slouches, but that's how good the baseball level is. So, but here's what happens. And I'll give an example with the Rangers. You're at Frisco, which is the AA team of the Rangers, right? And you are a shortstop. What are your chances in the next 5 to 10 years of ever replacing Elvis Andrus? Slim and none. It's not going to happen. So what do? Well, Major League rules say you have to sit out a year to become a free agent. So you don't sit in baseball. If you sit out a year, you lose those skills. So they come down, they play independent ball. They'll come down, or here's the other thing that happens a lot of times, and this is kind of the sad part about baseball. You're 23 years old. You've been playing professional ball for 3 years. You're at the AA level. They look at you and they say, okay, how does he project? Will he ever be on a major league roster? They just drafted out of high school an 18-year-old third baseman, and they think, okay, I need that slot because I need to put that 18-year-old. He's got 5 years to prove to me he can play. I don't think this guy's going to do it. Well, now that guy needs a job. And so he goes plays independent ball. They work on their skills. They work on what they've been told they need to, and then that's the kid that keeps up. My argument has always been, I've been asked, where do you rate the league? It's probably called a high A league, but I will almost argue it could almost be double A, and here's why. Our hitters are definitely A or double A, but our pitchers, some of them have major league experience. Some of them are 34, 35 years old, and if any of you are pitchers or even know anything about it, it's all up here. Throwing, there's a lot of throwers, but knowing what to do with it takes experience and wisdom. So we probably have a double A or triple A roster on the pitching, but then we have single A hitters and fielders. So you can kind of, figure it out from there. Any other questions?
I had an anecdote about Duke Snyder. We live in Grand Prairie, and my son plays at Grand Prairie High School, but he's out practicing one day, and the guy taking his tickets, maybe we play, is that your son? Yeah. We got talking, and he said, I played for the Fort Worth Cats back in 1946, and I really consider myself lucky. I was in the Navy, and my roommate was Joe DeMaggio. I came to Fort Worth, and I lost out to a guy named Edwin Snyder. So if you ever run across the name Barry Hill,
Okay. Barry Hill?
that's who, I haven't ever looked it up.
I've actually, that name rings a bell.
Yeah, but
Barry
it's
Hill.
supposed to be the center fielder when Snyder came up.
Well,
In his career.
Jack Lindsay, who played for the Cats in Montreal back and forth, he always blames the fact that they had some silly shortstop in Brooklyn called Pee Wee Reese, and that's why he never got to play. But Jack, I love him to death. He's 81 years old. He's a UT grad, and I'm an Aggie, so we don't get along there at all. And he likes to do this. So anyway, we all laugh and have a good time. But no, Jack's awesome. Likes to talk about them Longhorns though. Wow. But anyway.
The other thing, long before I was born, I'm a Mahia Gasser. The Mahia Gassers, they were like a league team back in the 20s.
Yes. What were they called again?
Mahia Gassers.
Oh, the Mahia Gassers. Oh yeah.
They go long field in the 20s.
Oh, we had the Marlin Bathers. We had, I said the Ranger Nitros. There were the Renegades, the Vernon Dusters, Vernon, Texas. There was some unique, and what I understand is the fields in Pampa, Vernon. I found Abilene. Abilene's an old H-E-B grocery store right now. And it was a funny story. Trying to find it. I had maps, and I kind of, that's got to be it. But I'm one of those, when I do my research, I want to know for sure. So I looked across, and there's this old little strip center that had to be 80 years old, and Abilene played until 1956. So I walked in the old barber shop, and there's this old barber cutting hair. I said, sir, could I bother you for a second? He said, sure. He said, I was trying to find the old side of the old Abilene Eagles ballpark. And he just went, right there. I said, you mean like the H-E-B? He said, yeah. Stands backed up here and so forth. In fact, during the day, I'd go over there and watch a game and sit at the very top level, and my assistant would be down here, and if he needed me, he'd wave a flag, and I'd come down there and go cut hair. So,
Yes, sir. The facade is still there at the entrance.
Yes, Majors Field,
Yeah,
Greenville Majors. Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir.
I need to confess that I'm a Yankee. I used to root for the Milwaukee Brewers a long time ago. I don't know the Fort Worth Cats very well, and then I was a White Sox fan. And this has been a fun educational meeting. And about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I went to a retirement home and listened to Eddie Robinson talk.
Wonderful guy.
And he's 90 years old. He looks like $1 million, and I think he lives in Fort Worth.
He does?
Book which I'm reading, so all this nostalgia is kind of really a lot of fun.
That's neat. No, in fact,
Thanks for coming.
oh, no, y'all have been great. And Eddie Robinson, by the way, joins us for that breakfast occasionally. So that he's a hoot. I love him to death. Yeah, Eddie's great. Loves to play golf too, even at his age. Any other questions?
Did you know Paul Richards?
I never got to meet Paul, but Paul, of course, Waxahachie. But my favorite team growing up just because of the timing. I'm 51, and so at 10 years old, when you really start getting into this kind of stuff, the Baltimore Orioles were my team. I thought I was Brooks Robinson for 5 years. You know, watching him make those plays against the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates and Boog Powell and Manny Sanguin, and I mean I can go on and on. And so Paul's the one that actually started the Orioles franchise when they moved from St. Louis to Baltimore, and so I kind of, you know, got connected a little bit with Paul that way.
He was the White Sox manager when Eddie Robinson was on that team, and Eddie maintains that Paul taught Eddie how to manage, and who later became a manager and a general manager and all that. So they were like really close.
Well, the people that I've talked to about Paul Richards says he was the greatest baseball guy that they've ever met.
That's exactly what Eddie
He was
There's-
the first guy to keep track of pitch counts. There's a really good book about Paul Richards, and I think Eddie Robinson figures heavily in. It's called The Wizard of Waxahachie.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. The Wizard of Waxahachie, for those, and I remember that.
And he talks about the White Sox and the Baltimore years.
About the Cats when they had Gentile and Demeter playing outfield, 40-some-odd home runs apiece.
It was
Back
more
in
than,
57.
it was 57, and this is a funny story. Our first manager when we brought back the Cats was Jim Gentile, and he lives in Oklahoma. And yeah, they had a war going on till about 40, and then Demeter stopped hitting them, and Gentile kept on. I think he had 56. And he wanted to know, I mean, he kept bugging me. Like, I want to know how many I hit on the road and how I hit at home. I'm like going, Jim, I'd have to go back through every box score you played. Oh, come on, you can do that. You can take, I mean, really? So actually I found a kid that got excited about it, let him do it. But we tracked him, and he hit like 26 on the road and 20 or 30 at home. It wasn't that big of a difference. But he could, I mean, because our left field porch is big, and we have a big, strong wind from that direction. So it'd been tough, but we figured it out for him.
And I think it was 51 or 52. I was in the third grade. My mother came to get me. What? Your dad's taking me somewhere. What? And we went to a great field in Cleveland, and Boston played, and that's when Larry Doby first came up.
Larry Doby, Bob Feller, Ted Williams, Bobby Dorr. I mean, I think in that one game there was about 6 or 7 Hall of Famers that played. Willie Mays played when the Giants came to town one year and played Cleveland again. I mean, it's been I mean, to think about it in this terms, there's only, we can't find more than 4, but we believe that there's 4 ballparks in America where you can really say that Babe Ruth played there. LaGray Field's one of them, Wrigley Field, Fenway Park, and then Rickwood Field in Birmingham, okay? But the Yankee Stadium's gone. All the old stadiums are gone. And we went through the minor league directory as best we can, and we cannot find any other stadium where they can say Babe Ruth played in. So don't miss the opportunity to go see LaGray Field and go see the dugouts.
Do they still have a sign outside of the dog?
We do. We have a sign outside. Well, it's actually all the 50 Hall of Famers that we've been able to verify with the box score that actually played in LaGray Field, including Brooks Robinson, who played for the San Antonio Missions when they came through town. So no, it's been a great fun. Any other questions? Oh, please, I'm here. We'll talk. Come look at the item. I want y'all to take a moment to grab the sleeve here of what they played in 1952, which is this jersey. By the way, one last anecdote. This jersey was actually worn by Jimmy Bregan. Jimmy was Bobby's brother. Jimmy wasn't as good a ball player as Bobby. And basically played about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, and then said you needed to go down to Greenville. And Bobby tells a story, about 2 weeks later, we had a pitcher that I had to let go. So I called him in my office, and I said, when you get to Greenville, say hello to my brother Jimmy.
Well,
Thank you.